Now let's turn our attention to methods and understanding the basics of methods. Now if you've been around C# longer than about 20 minutes, you're already familiar with this, but this lays a foundation for where we're headed next. And for those of you who are new, make sure this makes sense to you. Methods are a collection of code that provide a particular action, very similar to subroutines, functions, and other languages. And this is where we're going to create a few lines of code that carry out some particular actions, should be just some single action. And then we basically group them together, give them a name, and then just by calling that name, those lines of code are executed. It's a great way to subdivide functionality in our program and make it a lot easier to manage. So here's an example. I'm going to create a method here that looks like this. Now notice a little bit on the syntax here. Public, this is the modifier. This means this method's available from outside. We can call this from outside our object. Private would mean it's only available to the code inside the object. Integer, this means we're going to return an integer after this runs. Add this is the name of the method, and these are parameters that allow us to pass in arguments. So we're going to pass in two integers here. One will go into variable A, one will go into B. These will be added together. The integer right here will be returned back to whoever called this. Now, how do I call this method in my code? I just put the name of the method and my arguments inside parentheses, and that will call it. Now, wherever this is called, it will go run it and then return the integer right back here. So I can basically create a variable and set the variable equal to this. This will run and then load the variable, if that makes sense. So let's talk about these methods and these various aspects. We can use different modifiers I mentioned, public, private, and so forth. Methods can have 0 or more parameters. I'll show you this in code in just a moment. And these parameters allow you to pass what's called arguments into the method. Now the parameters are really just variables that are going to be used to pass in values. The methods can return a value to the caller of the method, and the best way to see this is to look at some simple demos. So I'm going to open Visual Studio 2012 once again, and we're going to create a project entitled Understanding Methods, and this will be out there in the Work Files folder so you can take a look at it. Understanding Methods. You can take a look at this later, and better yet, follow along with me and do some hands-on. Now this is all pretty straightforward C+ programming here. This is fundamental. All right, so I'm going to just drop a button onto my form here that we'll use to kick off the creation of the object. I'll just double click the button, let that move back out of the way, drag my button here, double click it, and let's get into the actual programming area on my code behind. So the first thing I want to do is, before I even write any code to call anything, I want to go down here and create my method. All right, well, let's do a very easy one first. It's going to be public, and we'll do void, meaning this is not going to return anything, and I'll just say hello. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is put my little standard message box out here and just let it say hello. Right? Pretty straightforward. Now, to call that, we're just going to, on our button click, just say hello. Just like that. So when we click on the button, it's going to call say hello. It's going to call this, execute, open a message box, and then it will pass control of the program right back to here. Now, if there was a variable here, I could load it, but there's nothing coming back because the void right here says that this particular method doesn't return anything. Okay, so let's run that. We'll click on our button. It will basically just run the method, and it should generate a message box that says hello. Okay, very good. Now, let's take a look at something that does return something. Okay, so let's do something that returns an integer. So I'm going to do a public, and we're going to do an integer as a return type this time. We're going to do add this. We're going to pass in two parameters or two arguments, and here are my parameters, int A and int B. Then I'll come down here and start to write my code. I'm just going to return A plus B. Can't get much simpler than this, right? And so now I just want to call that. So I'll just go down a line, leave myself a line space there so it's easy to see. And notice I'm going to create an integer called answer. And I'm going to set that equal to the results of running this particular method. So what's going to happen here when I run this? Okay, it's going to call add this and pass 7 and 8. It's going to come down here and run this. It's going to pass 7 and 8 into here. 7 and 8 is 15. It will return it as an integer to answer and load answer with 15. And then you know what we're going to do? If I can type it, System, Windows, Forms, Message Box, Show, and we are just going to tell it to tell us that the answer is, and then we're going to concatenate our variable answer. Notice that this variable is this right here, okay? And I got something messed up there. Okay, now let's run that and notice what happens. Okay, we had 7 and 8 in here, and so when we execute this, hello came up first because we called say hello, and the answer is 15. Now we could put text boxes up here and get our numbers, but let's change these. Let's change this to a 9 and to a 27. Okay, a little quick calculation with the brain there says that should be 36, right? And so we'll execute that and we'll get our say hello first, and then the answer is 36, and so it's working. That's the basics on methods. Hang on to that because we're really going to build on that very shortly here in the course.